recording? Cool. Let's go. So yeah, so we're going to just basically go on to hoisting and dropping the kite. I've kept it short and sweet because on the whole, it's not a complicated procedure. It just can be quite intimidating at times, especially if it's windy and you're thinking, oh God, should we be really getting this kite up in these conditions? And things like that. But on the whole, it could be, it normally comes with great excitement, shall we say, I think is the best way to put it. Right, let's hide you. Sorry, I'm just going to get everyone up so I can see you all. Great. Okay, yeah, so this is at the moment, for anyone, there's a couple of names I don't recognise there, or, oh, Soccer, I've not seen you on these before, hi there. And, yep, the Zoom stuff, the usual. Now, Rob's can't make it today, by the way. Rob's not feeling top, so he's not going to take part. So this is going to be in theory, the final of this series, but we'll come up with stuff that comes up next and let you know when we know. Yeah, and they've got one spot left on the day skipper course online if anyone wants, but the yacht master course is full. So, hoisting and dropping. So we're going to discuss symmetric and asymmetric. So we'll start with the symmetrical kites. Firstly, just a few things. If anyone's got any questions, please stick them in the chat and they'll ping up and I'll see them. But as Rob and I aren't sort of double teaming it, I may miss it. Alternatively, if you've got your video on, you can just kind of wave at me and that will get my attention. So hopefully that's option B for you there. Oh wow, it's a good turnout. So so symmetric kites, in some ways simpler, in other ways more complicated. So a symmetrical kite has a spinnaker pole, so we've got to take this into consideration when we're hoisting. But the primary function, the first step to any, I suppose you could argue that the first step is making sure that the kite is packed and actually ready to go. So don't get on a boat, put your spinnaker bag on the foredeck and try and hoist it without having someone. Ideally, the bow. The job of the bow is always just to make sure the kite is clean and ready to go. So the tapes have been run, so you want to make sure it's got no twists in it. So that on a symmetrical kite, we've got two luffs basically, because the kite is exactly symmetrical. So if you cut it down the middle, and it can be flown either way. So both edges, both of the side edges are luffs and leeches. So you want to make sure both of those are run, and if they are not twisted, then you cannot. It's impossible to have a twist in the foot. But then basically, unfortunately, I don't have a spinnaker here to demonstrate packing a kite, which is good because I hate packing kites. But it's much easier in a bedroom than it is on a boat beating up wind in waves, however. So yeah, so once we've got our kite plugged in, first of all, the questions are: is it going to be a port hoist or a starboard hoist? And therefore, if the spinnaker is going to be hoisted to port, for example, as it regularly is, so on a course, you generally round the windward mark to port. Okay, and the reason for that is that it means that if you're coming into the mark if you've laid the ley line and you're approaching the mark, you're approaching it on starboard, and that means that people who are coming in on port can't just barge their way in. If it's a rounding to starboard mark, they do happen, but they're a bit rarer, but they generally cause absolute chaos, because it means that the boats barging into the line are on starboard and therefore have priority, which causes shouting and collisions, basically. So we're assuming we're going to go for the anti-clockwise rounding, port hoist, starboard pole. Okay, and first of all, once if you don't have to do any more tacks, that's great. So you've hit the ley line, happy days. We're going to then prep the pole off to not the opposite of this picture. In fact, this picture, sorry, I've actually tried to find some decent material and videos to help go along with this, but couldn't find anything fantastic, if I'm being honest. So this kite here has been set for a starboard hoist and a port pole. So you see the pole is out the port hand side and the spinnaker is off the starboard side. And so we can see that the guy, you got everything rigged up to go. And so the foredeck team and the pit team have to work together really well here, and also the trimmers. Okay, so we've discussed this on previous sessions, but the when the foredeck are getting the kite prepped to go, the trimmers and the pit need to be aware and make sure that all the lines that they need to pull forwards to clip on to the right places are free to go, so that they're not going up there kind of holding on one-handed whilst they get waves down there over their face, up the nose and down their backs, etc. And then they realise that they can't actually put the ropes and the shackles where they need them because the idiots at the back of the boat haven't let them go. So it's always good to make sure you're kind of make sure everything is good to go before you go forward. So as the foredeck, as bow, you'd always have a look and say, right, I'm going to go forwards now. Pit, can you make sure the pole downhaul, pole uphaul, the guys and the sheets are all free to move, please. Okay. Once you're all set to go, so your spinnaker is set, you're basically going to, on your final approach to the mark, so when you're maybe a boat length or two away from the windward mark, you can now sneak the guy. Okay, so let's just say in this example, in this picture here, okay, we are going to go for a port hoist, starboard hoist, port pole, and so we're actually going to be rounding this mark to starboard just because it works in line with this video. Okay, so let's just say that the windward mark is a couple of boat lengths ahead of us. We're sailing up towards it. We now want to get our pole set in position. Okay, if not earlier, perhaps maybe 4 boat lengths away. Get the pole set at the right height, right kind of height, and then you can start pulling on the guy. So the guy in this situation is the port blue one, and that is going to pull the spinnaker out of the bag. And then once that guy once the spinnaker snugs up to the pole, the beak at the end of the pole here, it's then going to start to pull the pole backwards a bit. You just want to pull the pole literally 6 inches off the forestay, and then the foredeck can shout, right, made. Yeah, that sneaks. That means that the guy is set and ready for the hoist. Okay. And then as you come up to the mark, now this depends on how windy it is as to how early you hoist it. If it's quite light winds, you can probably start hoisting. And it also depends on the size of the boat, how quickly you can hoist your kite, and there's a lot of factors which affect all sorts of boats. So we're going to go with the standard Sigma 38 in this situation, or your 40-foot kind of boat. If it's light conditions, so conditions where we're not worried about broaching or losing control of the spinnaker too much. Okay, so basically on that, where do we call that kind of wind range? As a question to you. Want to put a hazard a guess in the comments there? When do we call kind of fairly relaxed spinnaker conditions? Anyone? Or you can unmute yourself and give us a shout out if you fancy. Obviously, it depends on your experience a little bit. Okay, well, not hearing much feedback there, so I'm just going to go Penny 3 to 5. Isn't a force 3 to 5? Penny, is that? When the sun is out. Okay, cool. I see where this is going. So for me, I would go with about under 15 knots of wind. If you've got 15 knots or less, beer in hand. Thank you very much, Derek. Okay, I'm afraid I don't. Is that a beer or a cup of tea? It's a bit early for a beer, Derek. So under 15 knots, you can be pretty ballsy, and you can just go for it early. So if you're still beating upwind, on your final boat lengths approach, you reckon you're about 5 seconds away from the mark. Start the hoist then and there. It may go wrong, but if it doesn't go wrong, you're going to get that kite up pretty damn spot on time, and it's going to be powered up literally as you bear away, and boof, off you go. If it's windy, if we're above 15 knots, in the kind of 15 to 20 knot range, you're only going to probably start the hoist as you start the bear away around the mark, and then when you hit the 20 knots, or maybe 25 knots, I would probably wait until I'd borne away a little bit more until I started the hoist. Okay.
You've still got jib up at that point.
The jib is still up at this point, so you can hide it behind the jib, but you've got to remember that your apparent wind, if you're sailing upwind and then as you bear away, the apparent wind is still coming from kind of in front of the boat, so the wind can still hit that kite as it gets to its initial hoist, and depending on how loose your kite bag is, it can suddenly fill up with power and blow out really quickly and end up in the water. So you want to make sure that ideally the spinnaker has been hoisted in a kind of sausage shape. So you want it to be kind of going just straight up and not billowing out early days, because if it then pops and gets loaded up with power too soon, it's going to become immediately very hard work for the mast, and your whole hoist maneuver will have a massive delay on it, and you're going to be going not as quickly as you could for about 30 seconds, maybe more, whilst you either try and get 2 or 3 people bouncing it up to the top of the mast, or you're grinding the halyard all the way up. These are 2 things that you do not want to be doing in a racing situation. Okay.
Rory, please could you repeat what you said about when you hoisted at 25 knots?
When you're hoisting at about 20, if you're hoisting at 25 knots, firstly, are you sure you're supposed to be doing this? Secondly, if you are and you've got a good crew, you want to be probably at least on a beam to broad reach. You want to be as you start hoisting, really. You want to be, if it's that windy, racing is all about not making mistakes. The person who wins makes the least mistakes. And there's no need to be trying to pull any fancy maneuvers off. You're just trying to do things as in control as possible. So you want to focus on being on your broad reach and then hoisting. Okay, you don't want to be on a dead run when you're hoisting the Spinnaker, because it can basically fly both sides, and if it gets too much wind shadow on it, it will just wrap itself around in circles, potentially wrap around the forestay, not with the jib still up, obviously. But it can wrap itself in a knot and form an hourglass. So you want to make sure that you have at least enough power in the sail. So if I'm if this is straight downwind, coming straight at you here, I want to be at least in this kind of area here. So for the dinghy terminology, a training run. Yeah, so when you're kind of talking 10 to 20 degrees off a run is the best place to hoist it, when it's really blowing dogs off chains. And then once it's hoisted, you've got it. The mast must shout "made." As soon as you shout "made," the trimmers are trimming on. The guy is being brought back, so the pole is coming back, and then you're going into trimming for speed. So in terms of the people in the pit and the trimmers controlling the guy and the sheet, they just go into, right, let's just make this go as fast as possible. And meanwhile, the foredeck team are getting the jib down or rolled away. Okay, and that's it. So in the last session we covered the jibe and etc. and things like that. So I don't want to talk into all that detail. But that is the hoisting procedure for a symmetric kite. Yeah, once it's set, and happy days. And remember, with a symmetrical kite, you're basically trying to have the wind perpendicular to the angle of the spinnaker pole. Okay, if it's very windy, and you want to know what's the best thing to do, do you bring the pole back further or drop it a bit further forwards if it's getting quite windy and a bit hard to control? You can point that way's forwards, that way's back. So you can drop the pole forwards a bit by moving the pole forwards. Okay, you're putting a bit more belly into the spinnaker, and so you're moving that centre of effort forwards, and also not presenting quite as much of it to the wind as you want. So you're stabilising the boat, and it's going to help make the whole thing more controllable. Okay, so if you are losing control on the helm, you want to be talking to the people on the guy and the sheet, and you say, right, pole forwards, please, and you just, get your control back. If you've got very flat water and it's not, even if it's windy, you can actually bring that pole really far back, because the further back you bring it, the more power you're giving yourself, but also the less stability, and the more likely you are to either broach or Chinese jibe or a list of things that could go not quite according to plan.
So that moving the pole forward, is that a bit like an equivalent of easing the main? Sort of depowering it a little bit.
So you've got to be careful with that, because remember, so easing the main things isn't necessarily... in terms of going upwind, so the equivalent, if you can translate this into how do you calm things down, when you're sailing upwind, you might drop the traveller down, for example. Dropping the traveller down is the kind of the equivalent of moving the pole forwards as the wind picks up, for example. What's another thing, if you are losing control, there's 2 things that should happen very quickly. So you want to have 2 people on these the whole time. So one is the guy. What is the other most important thing on a controlling yourself downwind with a kite up?
Kicker.
The kicker, yeah. The kicker and the vang are that's your Jesus Christ button. On lots of big boats, so I sailed on an 82 footer, which had a 650 square meter asymmetric spinnaker. and next to the helm was a button on the floor, which was quite hard to push. You had to reach for it, but it was called the Jesus Christ button. And when you pushed that, it released the hydraulic power in the vang and lifted the boom up really quickly. And because you don't really want to be broaching an 82-foot, £10 million yacht, that was basically your broach avoidance button. Because by releasing the power in the vang, you're lifting the boom up, you're spilling all the power in the mainsail, and that's moving the centre of power forwards to the spinnaker, which is going to help you turn the boat back downwind again. Okay. So your kicker is probably one of the most important controls when you're sailing downwind. And the crucial thing is as well, once you've eased your kicker, you've steered the boat downwind and you've got control again, is you want to make sure you pull the kicker back on again. Okay, because if you don't pull it back on again, you've got nothing to release when you next lose control. Yeah, because you can lose control of the boat with the kicker completely released. But it's all about what is... what's the word I'm looking for? Anyway, yeah, you need to have something to release in the moment to help ease that tension off the sail. Okay, so if you then go and power the boat back up again with the kicker still off, you're then completely screwed because you won't have that ability to lose any more power at the back of the boat.
Resetting your panic button.
It's your panic, exactly. You've got to reset the panic button. Exactly. I like that. Reset the fuse. Sorry, someone's got a bit of background noise. I'm just going to put everyone on mute there. Mute. However I do that. Where's my mute all button? Oh, it's hidden. There we go. Cool. So, asymmetrics. Basically, it's the same situation, similar kind of thing. A lot of the rules that I've just discussed are the same for an asymmetric. It's just on the whole bit simpler. Okay, so first of all, you plug in the kite, port or starboard side. Don't need to worry about a pole here. Okay, and then questions are asked about how we plug in an asymmetric, because we talked about the inside, or in fact that's what's missing off this list. Are we rigging it for an inside jibe or an outside jibe? So first of all, port or starboard. So whatever, in this picture they're going for a port hoist. Yeah, so they're on a starboard tack. We can see the tack line has been sneaked already in this situation. So the tack line's been sneaked to the end of the bowsprit. Okay, going back a step to how we plug it in. It's very hard to plug in your asymmetric kite, or any kite, when you're sailing upwind and it's behind the jib. So we can see that, imagine this is a TP52 here. So the kite is actually down the hatch at this stage. Once the kite is down the hatch and you've just got the three corners, the tack, clew and head sticking out, that's actually much easier because it's not in the bag anymore. And you don't, when you're hoisting from a bag, it's clipped onto the rail. And if the sail's there, you've got to kind of like sometimes do it blind and you're kind of like, I think that's that corner. So plug that one on and things like that. That's when you have hilarious situations. Has anyone ever hoisted a spinnaker, an asymmetric spinnaker, 1/3 of the way rotated? So rather than having the head at the top, you've got the head attached to the sheets or the tack. Anyone? Just me? Okay. Well, it's good fun.
Good man.
It's
good man.
It looks
done that, flown it like a pennant.
Yeah, exactly. Flying it like it is an ensign or a pennant. It looks ridiculous. The logo doesn't look quite right. Mr. Venables has done it as well. I've actually done the same with it. Yeah, symmetrical kites are quite good to do like that as well. A symmetrical kite, you can kind of almost blag it and get away with it for a leg.
But that's what you have black indelible markers for. Get right, tack and clue and
yes, but it's all well and good having your corners labelled. But if you're leaning, your face is resting on the jib whilst you're slamming upwind, covered in water, and you're feeling the spinnaker bag behind the jib, it's not great. So which is why it's always good to be prepared for the hoist. Always try and plug the spinnaker in when you're on the opposite tack to what you're going to be hoisting it on, because that means the jib is on the far side and you're plugging it all in on the high side and you can see everything and you can, great. It's always...
Don't put the halyard on, otherwise the helm yells at you.
Don't put the halyard. So that's going towards answering Addy's question from last session, which is how do we attack, which order do you do it in? Firstly, always do the tack line first. Okay, so on these boats with a big bowsprit, the tack lines get left clipped onto the pulpit. So so this guy here would have grabbed the, when it was on the other tack, grab the port tack line, because this boat's got two. I'll have one for each side, most likely. And then they're going to pull the tack line back, clip that onto the tack. Okay, that's that one done. Then you're going to go, so you've done the front part of the spinnaker. Then you go to the back part of the spinnaker, get the sheets. Okay, so you've got the sheet attached. And so remember, you've got your lazy sheet. This is going to be quite hard to demonstrate. This is what I was looking for a picture for. Okay, so what I'm going to attempt. Okay, let's just attempt this. Okay, don't laugh.
Okay.
Oh, I've got too many things in the way. Okay, so right, how are we going to do this? Here is our orange bow. Okay, that's the bow of the boat. Our sheets. So here's the red spinnaker bag. Probably a little clash of colours there. Let's go for blue. And the blue is our sheets. Okay, so we've got the tack line. Sorry, blue is the tack line. Tack line is now attached. So we're ready for this. This is going to go off the port side, and the tack line is to the port side of the forestay. Okay. So
you
now
have to draw a little round circle on the front for the forestay, because that's really important.
Forestay's pink.
Yeah.
Okay. Right, I'm running out of colours. Green. Green are going to be my sheets. So now I'm going to attach my sheets. So I've got port sheet, and then I've got my starboard sheet. Okay, now this is part of the question here. So sheet going around the outside of the tack line there, and then that's my lazy sheet. So as I hoist that will be my lazy green sheet. So the question here is, do I want to do an inside jibe or an outside jibe? If I want to do an outside jibe, you'll notice the lazy sheet, firstly, is on top of the tack line. Okay. And so if I attach my halyard, what colour are we going for halyard? Let's go black. Okay. If I attach my halyard to the spinnaker here, again, the lazy jib spinnaker sheet is going around the outside. It's outside of the halyard, and it's outside the tack line. Are we with me? Okay, if I want to do an inside jibe, I need to put my lazy spinnaker sheet. It's going to get messy. Okay, so now I'm going to do dark green. Dark green is, so light green is set for the outside jibe. Now, dark green is going under the tack line. The tack line is over the top of the lazy spinnaker sheet and coming around that way. Okay, so that is now going to be an inside jibe. So the halyard and the tack line are on the outside of the lazy sheet. Does that make sense? I find it hard enough demonstrating this when I've actually got the spinnaker in front of me, let alone by drawing a bollocks picture. But yeah, so the simple thing is really, I always attach the tack line first, then attach the sheets, and then you've got the lazy sheet there, and then you basically either throw the lazy sheet over the top and maybe just outside the boat, and then you plug your halyard in, or bring the lazy sheet towards you and then put the halyard around the outside of the lazy sheet, and then just have a double check. It shouldn't make an enormous difference with the tack line. I've just realised actually it's mostly just the halyard there that makes the big difference. Okay, and that's normally the best way to decide. So if you want to do an outside jibe, you put the spinnaker sheet outside of everything, and then if you want to do an inside jibe, you gather the spinnaker sheet inside and put the halyard on the outside. I'm going to stop that there.
That was quite good. Follow that.
Did you follow that?
Yeah, that makes sense.
How did everyone else follow that?
What happens if you do it wrong and plug the sheet in over the top of the tack line but under the halyard, or vice versa?
Okay, so you've done the sheet.
People swear at you mostly.
So what happens there is that you're actually, if you do it wrong, you're probably going to change it to an inside jibe. So I know this is not going to make sense in everyone, so you have to stick with me. The best thing is just literally to visualize it. Go into meditation mode, visualizing your spinnaker in front of you. Okay, so you had your sheet was on the outside. Did you say the outside of the tack line, but inside the halyard? So basically, all that needs to happen in that situation is the clue needs to rotate itself round, and then it's going to ping itself into an inside jibe situation. Define an inside and an outside jibe. Will do. Hang on. So I've just seen all of this here.
Rory, surely
Lisa is an option.
It always goes over the tack line. If it goes under the tack line, that would be impossible, wouldn't it?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, which is why you always attach the tack line first, and then the sheets can't go.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, sorry. Ignore the tack line stuff. It's the halyard that makes the main difference. So yeah.
Whether it goes inside or outside the halyard, the forestay.
No, it's always going to go outside the forestay. Everything must go outside the forestay. It's whether the sheets go outside the forestay but inside the spinnaker, or outside the forestay and the spinnaker.
Oh, so it's all about the halyard.
So it's all about the halyard. So
whether it's folding in towards you or folding out away from you.
Exactly.
So if you think of it like peeling back towards you, it's either peeling into you or peeling away from the boat. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So does that make sense? So an inside jibe. So if this is my forestay, okay, here's my spinnaker, my square-shaped spinnaker. Oh no, that's not going to work. Ignore that. I might draw another picture. I quite like that. It wasn't awful. So if I'll go back for my pink forestay again. There's my forestay. Oh god, that was awful. I'm going to have a black boat this time. There we go. Here's the boat. Okay, and then let's just say I've got a bowsprit as well. It's not the prettiest of bowsprits. So I've got, there we go. So if I want to do an inside jibe, then my spinnaker, which is green, is out like this. And when I jibe it, it's going to follow this route. The clue here is going to pass inside the spinnaker and outside the forestay like that. So that the new spinnaker on the, I should use a different colour for that. Okay, so that's going to be, so the spinnaker is going to invert itself inside. So the clue is going to come in between the end of the bowsprit and in front of the forestay. Yeah. An outside jibe is where the clue goes around the outside of both of them and comes back this way. Are we following me there?
Yes.
Yeah, cool. Right, back to, where were we? There. Okay, cool. So that's that one. Sorry, how am I doing for time? Oh god, I'm way over the time. Okay, so once you so it's a case of sneak the tack. Once it's all set, you've rigged it up correctly for the correct jibe. Blah blah blah. As you're approaching the windward mark, sneak that tack to the end, so that it's set and made at the end of the pole. And then again, depending on the wind conditions, is the similar kind of thing as to how early you fancy going for the hoist. Okay, if it's gentle winds, you can start hoisting a bit sooner. If it's windier, you want to be bearing away before you fully start hoisting for it.
There is one slight twist. If you've got a J boat with a bowsprit that goes out, so it pulls out on the tack prop. So have you seen the ones where they come out like a big prodder at the end?
Yeah.
As opposed to the fixed one. If you pull the bowsprit out before you get to the windward mark, you get disqualified.
So yeah, watch out for class rules. I think that's answered itself.
Yeah.
Yep, happy with that. So watch out for your class rules. Yeah. So some boats you're not allowed to sneak your tack and pull and extend your bowsprit until you have rounded the mark. Okay, and then once you're ready, again depending on conditions and class rules, hoist as quick as you bloody well can. Once it's made, mast shout's made because they can feel it. Pling, you can hear it clang normally, and bear away. You put your hand sheet on as quick as you can, and again drop the jib, and focus on the kite. Trim for speed. Okay. The drops. Drops are fun. I haven't got any pretty pictures for them. What does the future like? That's a deep question. So whenever you're on your downwind leg, you're always thinking about, right, at the next mark, what do we need to do? So it's a kind of a tactical decision. Do we need to drop this, get around this mark, and then tack over and head back out that way? Or can we round the mark, drop the kite, round the mark, and then have a messy boat and continue up on that tack for, enough time to give us, time to recover the mess and chaos that we've caused on board? Because they make a big difference. Because often the drops that let you drop it later and therefore allow you to sail faster as late as possible to the leeward mark are the ones that normally mean the boat ends up in a bit more chaos. Whereas if you need to do certain manoeuvres, if you need to do a manoeuvre really quickly after that, then you might need to consider dropping the spinnaker earlier so that you can round the mark and then go straight into attack and for it to work. Because if you've ever sailed if you've ever raced with a symmetrical spinnaker, if you haven't ever got to a bottom mark and found that things are twisted in ways you never knew that they could get twisted in, then you're not trying hard enough, basically. Okay, so thinking ahead is the key for dropping both kinds of spinnakers, but particularly symmetrical spinnakers. These things, all things we consider. So do we need to tack immediately? Is it windy? Is it light winds? And again, if it's very windy, you want to give yourself time, because it takes longer. If it's windier, it tends to take a bit longer to drop the kite than it does in light winds. In light winds, you can generally do a really quick, literally one boat length away, right, drop, and down it comes, and rounding up, and you're rounding up just as the last bit of the spinnaker is going down, and you're off upwind. Happy days. Okay. It's all really good talking about it like this. This is, how it goes probably 20% of the time in my experience. So the different types of drops. There's lots of different types of drops for both. I'm going to go over my time limit by at least 15 minutes, by the way. So no worries if you want to go. So spiking or blowing. So spiking it is where you basically have a marlin spike, which is a metal spike, which you jam into the talisker. The talisker is the shackle, which I do not have here to demonstrate. But you've got a standard shackle, which you see on lots of boats. You've got ones which you screw up. You've got the snap shackles where you pull a pin and it opens up. And then you've got a talisker. Talisker is a special spinnaker. It's designed to be easily releasable even when it's under load. Okay, so they're the ones with the jaws that normally close and pinch like that. And then they've got a little button which you can put your finger in and pull down to release it. Ideally, they've got a little pull cord on them, so you can pull them to release them. But the best thing is if you've got a marlin spike, you shove a marlin spike in there and ping, it releases it really quickly. I'm going to find you a photo of someone mid-spike in 2 seconds, because there are some cracking ones of those. 2 seconds, where are you? Sorry, this is what I was just about to be attaching to. Ah, there we go. Come back. Can we see this? Can you see what I'm seeing here? The alarmy photo. So yeah, this guy is at the end of the pole, getting ready to spike it for the drop. Okay, so it can be quite exciting on big boats with spinnaker poles, because you've got to get the bow to go up there, and then you can basically consider the fact that they're not going to be around to help with the drop, so you've lost a crew member as well. Okay. Whereas, if you just blow it, blowing it is just a case of making sure as you go for the drop, you just make sure the guy and the sheet on the windward side are both smoked off the winches, so it's free, and the spinnaker blows all the way around with the sheets attached. And it tends to mean that you might have, if it doesn't go according to plan, you end up with lots of rope in the water. Not the end of the world, it's just a bit messier, that's all. Okay. Also, are you going to drop it down the hatch? So there's the hatch on the foredeck, often the best place to drop it. Again, class rules, like sunsail racing, for example, you're not allowed to drop it down the fore hatch. Really annoying. And are you going to drop it to windward or to leeward? Okay. Windward drops you don't tend to do very often on symmetrical spinnakers. That's more of a asymmetric drop. And if you're going to do normally down the companionway is the full safe. You know, the fallback. Okay, right. It's too windy to drop it down the forepeak hatch. We're going to drop it down the main companionway. So you've got everyone in the cockpit chucking it down the companionway, and you can go under the boom or you can go over the top of the boom. So between the sail and the boom, so you're feeding it in that gap created by the outhaul, and that's called a letterbox drop. Okay, and that's quite good because it just means that it keeps the spinnaker up higher and reduces the likelihood it's going to go in the water. Okay, and then the procedure is, again, firstly you want to bear away. You get ready to spike or blow the tack guy sheet, basically whatever's at the end of the pole, you're just disconnecting. So you want to keep the pole often attached to the guy. Keep the pole in. So the pole is still attached to the guy. So you're basically just going to, if this is the shackle attached to the spinnaker, you're going to open that up, but you've still got control of the guy using the of the pole using the guy, but the spinnaker is just no longer attached to it. So it may like swing back a bit and swing around a bit. So you got to watch out for that. There is one variation on here. Okay, and then it's a case of as the pit on the halyard, generally you want to ditch a large amount of halyard quickly, but then stop. So you want to drop about 25, it varies on the boat and the wind conditions, but about, let's just say 25% of the halyard, you want to just smoke really quickly and then stop it without losing all the skin on your fingers. Okay, and that's just going to, that happens at the same time as the spike. So when we say, right, okay, ready, 3, 2, 1, spike, drop, it's a, bow is going to stab the talisker, spinnaker flies back, we drop the halyard about 25%, the spinnaker is going to lose all of its power. At that point, it's the most important point where everyone pulls as quickly as they can, and the key is gathering in the foot. If you just pull the sail down one edge, you're still ending up with the other half of it in the air and it's going to be flapping around the place. If you gather the foot all together and then pull down, you're pulling it down into a sausage shape again. So it's like the same as the hoist but in reverse, and that helps it keep under control. Okay, and that's one of the most crucial things. But the most crucial thing is the halyard control. So your pit's job is probably the most crucial in making this go smoothly. Obviously you've flaked your halyard out beforehand, make sure there's no knots in it. If you get a knot in a halyard, you're getting the knife out. Okay, and you're cutting it, because that's just, if you get the spinnaker halfway down and then it jams in the knot, it's going to take probably 3 or 4 seconds. The spinnaker is going to fill up with power again and then blow itself out, and everyone who's holding onto it is going to go with it unless they let go, and you're going to lose control of the spinnaker. So if it's windy, you're going to get a knife and you're going to cut that halyard, and it's going to go in the water, but at least you're not going to lose the spinnaker. So dropping in control, and then as basically it's the key of whoever's on the pit and on the halyard is watching the spinnaker and the crew and how well they're dealing with it. So often if you're in the pit standing by the winch, you can't see anything because you've got a spinnaker wrapped around your head. So you often want to kind of try and stand back a bit and stand in a point where you can see. If you can't, then the kind of whoever the skipper, crew boss, helm is kind of calling faster, slower, faster, slower. Okay, but you basically want to see that spinnaker coming down and above the water level and into the boat. If the spinnaker is going down and then up and into the boat, slow down. And if the spinnaker is coming straight down like that, and you can see all the crew are pulling and fighting the halyard, then you need to speed up with the speed of the halyard. Sorry, I just talked at you a lot there. Hopefully that kind of... Any questions there?
One thing I would say is, in my experience, people have always underestimated how much power there is in a spinnaker. If you're dropping it or doing anything like that, you've got to make sure all the lines are free to run and you haven't got legs round them, stood on them or anything like that.
Yeah, exactly. I've seen a couple of people get spinnaker sheets wrapped around their foot and they just get swept off their feet as it tightens around their ankle, and it's generally quite uncomfortable. On big boats, it'll kill you. Basically, on a 40-foot boat, it probably wouldn't kill you, but it will certainly, put you in A&E. So you've got to always make sure if you're in any position with sheets, guys, things flying out, make sure you're not treading in the middle of them all. Okay, yeah, so as Peter says, good point. And then, yeah, once it's all down, it's the tidy up. And that's generally just down to resetting it how it was before. Packing the kite, resetting the guys, sheets, etc. Yeah, so yeah, I've had Spinnaker drops go wrong on me several times. I've had the Spinnaker go in the water, and then as it loads up with power and water, the guy and sheet swept the deck, and 3 people were in the way of them, and they all got picked up by it and swung to the back of the boat, probably about 5 meters, and just dragged as if they were nothing, and pushed against the push pit at the back of the boat. So if it does go in the water, be aware that if the boat's travelling fast, you're not going to be able to hold on to that rope. So you've got to try and stop the boat as quickly as possible and then recover the Spinnaker. Don't try and be a hero and lose your fingers. Okay. Asymmetric drops. Quite a lot of fun with these. I love asymmetric drops because I'm so used to doing symmetrical drops. I find the asymmetrical ones a pleasure most of the time. You can do all sorts of fun things. You can do the Windward Drops more easily than you can on a symmetric. Actually, sorry, ignore asymmetrics. Going back, one thing you can do before this, I won't overcomplicate it. If you are going to need to do that tack very soon after we go around the mark, one thing you can do is you can disconnect the pole from the Spinnaker altogether, get it down on the deck, and then fly the Spinnaker without a pole attached, as if you were going through a jibe. You must obviously go very deep downwind. And then when it comes to the whole dropping procedure, everything's kind of the same, but you just don't have a pole. See, Bill? You don't have a pole in the way. Okay, so it just means that once the kite's down, we're all good to go. There we go. Asymmetric. So yeah, there's all sorts of things you can do here. And don't forget to hoist the jib before you start the drop. And yes, hoisting the jib happens first. Or unfurling it if you've got a furler. With the asymmetric, so if you want to do, for example, quite a nice thing to do, if you're rounding a mark to port, okay, so we're rounding it anti-clockwise. If we come into that mark on starboard, that's quite a nice thing to do because it means that firstly, in terms of rules of the roads, you've got the priority, you're on starboard, and you'll be the inside boat, so they've got to give you water. And also it allows you to do what's called a Kiwi Drop or a Mexican drop, depending on where you're from or who you've sailed with, etc. And the Kiwi Drop basically means that you keep the kite up, so you've got the kite flying off the port bow, and then you're going to sheet that in and then go through a jibe. And as you jibe, the kite's going to jibe, except because you're not letting it fly forwards, it's just going to invert and it's going to collapse itself on the now hoisted jib. So you've got the jib up, the kite now collapses onto the jib, and then you're going to drop the halyard and bring the kite down, and it's just going to slide over the windward side of the jib now. Okay, that is a really nice way of dropping an asymmetric. It looks and sounds kind of scary, but actually is easier on the whole than the alternatives. The alternative is basically same as, instead of blowing the guy or spiking it, you're doing the same with the tack line. So you blow the tack line, blow the halyard 25-30%, everyone pulls on the sheet and gets control of it, and then the halyard then gets eased at the same speed that everyone can pull it in. And the key is that always, with any Spinnaker drop, asymmetric or symmetric, that you're trying to drop it down the back of a sail, whether that's the jib or the mainsail. The Kiwi Drop is the exception to the rule where you're actually dropping it around the windward side, but if you're dropping it down the leeward side of a sail, it won't have any power, and no matter how windy it is, like that time when we went on our broaching weekend, Lisa, it was kind of 25, gusting 30 knots. If it had filled with power, it would have been game over for everyone holding on to it, but because it didn't, it was right behind the mainsail. It came down nice and easily, if you can call it easily. Yeah, that's about that, really.